Hallo und willkommen zu einem Gespräch mit Dr. Daniel Siegel. Mein Name ist Usha Swamy, ich bin vom Abo Verlag und ich freue mich sehr, heute mit Daniel Siegel über Präsenz und Gewahrsein zu sprechen. Hello and welcome, Dr. Siegel. And thank you very much for your time and the opportunity to talk with you today about presence and being aware.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Dr. Daniel Siegel ist Professor für Psychiatrie an der Universität in Kalifornien in LA. Er ist ebenfalls Gründer des Mindful Awareness Research Centers und er gründete auch das Mindsight-Institut, das sich um die Vermittlung von Einsicht, Empathie und Mitgefühl kümmert. Und er ist Buchautor, hat schon verschiedene Bücher geschrieben, darunter viele Bestseller und darunter auch das Buch Gewahr, sein, das kürzlich im Abo Verlag erschienen ist und darüber möchten wir auch heute sprechen. Dr. Siegel, in your books you explore how our mind works and how you explore awareness and how it affects the brain, and this not only for adults but also for children. So, but before we start to talk about awareness and presence, maybe a more personal question. So, could you tell in your own words how your own journey into mindfulness and meditation began? How did this journey start?
I think it started in perhaps two very distinct ways. One was when I was in medical school, realizing that you could have a way of living where you were not aware of your mind, your thoughts, your feelings, your memories, and didn't know how to try to see those in other people. So I made up a word, mind sight, for seeing the mind and the mind's processes. And then later on, when I became a researcher studying parent-child relationships, there came a finding in that field of study that the more you made sense of your life, the more your children would thrive. And at the same time, the field of mindfulness was becoming something very big in the research field. This was now in like 2003, 2004. And I was given the opportunity to speak with a person named Jon Kabat-Zinn on a panel. And I didn't know anything about meditation at the time. And he didn't know much about research on attachment, the parent-child relationships. So we found that the two fields overlapped, the field of secure attachment and children thriving, and the field of going inward and developing what you could call mindful awareness overlapped. So that moment in 2005 was really the beginning of my formal introduction to meditation, because Jon Kabat-Zinn said to me, "You don't know anything about meditation," which was true. He said, "Why don't you go learn by going to a retreat?" So I went to a retreat with about 100 scientists, many of them brain scientists, in silence for a week. And I wrote about that in a book called The Mindful Brain, as a new person just learning to meditate. So the book Aware is then, over a dozen years later, about, how the science of attention and the science of awareness and consciousness itself have emerged in the last dozen years.
Okay. Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
And now the book Aware has the subtitle, The Science and Practice of Being Present. So also, what means being present for you? And why is it important?
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. The term being present can be understood in lots of different ways. One basic way is to say, as you're experiencing life, are you aware? Do you know? Do you have consciousness? So awareness, consciousness, knowing, those three words in English, in German, maybe they're different kinds of words. because every language is a little different. But in English, those are three words that try to get at this sense that when something is happening, you hold it in a space of knowing that it's happening. So, for example, if you're walking down the street, you can have your mind thinking about a vacation you'd like to go on, and you hit your foot on a rock, you know, so you really weren't present for the walk. You were present for your imagining about the vacation, but not for the walk. And so you got hurt, or you didn't appreciate the walk. So presence, awareness, consciousness, knowing, those are trying to get at the notion of a receptive state, an experience, a way of being really, where you are very much alive, awake in that moment for the unfolding of life as it happens.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And some people live that way naturally. Some people don't and can develop it through meditation, which means mind training. And some people are not interested in it. And what the research is so fascinating is that when you have presence in your life, there are many physiological changes in your body that improve health.
Mm-hmm.
And there are changes in your brain that improve resilience. So we can talk about those, but that's why the subtitle of the book is The Science and Practice of Presence. I wanted to take the science that was emerging and then offer the most fundamental practices to allow you to get those positive health changes that research has proven come along with being present.
Yes, and this brings me to the wheel of awareness, which is a central part of the book, Aware. Mm-hmm. And it's a meditation practice you developed.
Yes.
And could you tell the basic idea of this wheel of awareness?
Yes. So years before I met Jon Kabat-Zinn and learned that there was even this practice that was being studied, it had just begun, a mindful awareness or mindfulness meditation. That was not a part of my life. I had been working to bring different sciences together in a field called interpersonal neurobiology. So we were bringing everything from anthropology to physics and math together into one framework to understand the mind. And in that practice of bringing the sciences together, I was also a psychotherapist and looking to see if we could offer a definition of the mind, number one, and then say what a healthy mind was, number two. And then once that became clear in the early 1990s, then I started working in therapy to say, what could I do as a therapist to bring health and well-being to my clients, my patients? And there was a singular process called integration, which is where different things can be linked that seem to be at the heart of health. And another process that seemed to be worth really paying attention to was consciousness, that whether you looked at parenting or teaching or therapy, consciousness for each of those relational experiences was needed to try to promote healthy change. So on the one hand, consciousness was needed for change. The other hand, integration was needed for health. So then I said to myself as a therapist, what if we integrated consciousness? That would require identifying the different aspects of consciousness and distinguishing them from each other, which in English we use the term differentiate or make different. And then we link those differentiated elements. So there's a table in my office that looks like a wheel, and I put the knowing of consciousness as a metaphor in the hub of that wheel. And then we put the knowns, like what you hear or see or smell or taste or touch, or what you feel in your body or your thoughts or emotions, or even your sense of connection to a larger sense of self than just your private self. We put those on the rim and we call those the knowns. We differentiate each of the knowns from each other by moving a metaphoric spoke of attention of this wheel around the wheel. And then in an advanced practice that you do in the book, we even bend the spoke of attention around to rest in pure awareness. And I started doing that with my patients, with my students, and then with workshop participants, even in Germany. And the results were amazing. And I've now done that in person when we could meet in person, with over 50,000 people doing it and taking the microphone, many of them, and saying what the experience was like. And that's what the book Aware is. It's really the first very comprehensive summary of tens of thousands of people reporting what happens when you do this 25-minute simple, I call it an integration of consciousness practice. John Kabat-Zinn and Jack Kornfield and others who've experienced the wheel say, oh, that is a mindfulness practice, but it didn't start that way. And it has the three components that research shows are so important. It focuses attention, number one. It opens awareness, number two. And it helps build kindness, number three. So kind intention, open awareness, focused attention. Those are, you could call, three pillars of the kind of mind training that research has been studying over the last, 10 to 20 years.
Okay, and could you say a bit about the benefits the people experience doing this practice? What do they report after? How do their lives change?
Yeah, so there are two kinds of benefits to talk about. One, we can talk about the wheel of awareness itself and what people have described doing it in a 25-minute practice and then making it a regular practice in their life. So we can talk about that. But the second thing we can also talk about is that the wheel of awareness, it turns out, has these three pillars: focused attention, open awareness, and kind intention training. And so there's separate research on usually independent practices that do each of those three. And there are 6 major health benefits physiologically and in the brain that 3-pillar practice, we can call it, has been shown to create. Now, the wheel of awareness has not been studied that way, but it has each of the 3 components that have been studied. So it would be a natural thing to say, if you need to do 3-pillar practice, here's how you can do it in one 25-minute practice. So I do it every day, and no one studied me, but I'm actually 120 years old. So you can see one of the benefits is it optimizes your telomerase level, so it slows the aging process. And that was beautiful work done by Elizabeth Blackburn and Alyssa Eppel to show that when you learn to be present by focusing attention, opening awareness, and developing kindness, or when you naturally have presence, an enzyme that repairs the ends of your chromosomes is enhanced. David Cresswell, an old colleague of mine from UCLA, did a beautiful controlled study showing that compared to relaxation, these 3-pillar practices actually change the epigenetic controls to reduce inflammation, amazingly, whereas relaxation does not do that. Another set of studies shows it improves immune function. Another set of studies shows it improves cardiovascular function. And another set of studies shows that a 3-pillar practice, is what I'm referring to, it reduces the stress hormone cortisol. So it reduces stress. And then the brain studies show the brain basically becomes more integrated. The differentiated areas become linked. And a separate study, not on mindfulness, but on the brain in general and well-being, shows that the more integrated your brain, what's called an interconnected connectome, these subtle ways the brain is differentiated and how they're linked, that's the best predictor of your happiness and your health. Okay. And integrated brains are what these 3-pillar practices create in the brain. And I could talk about the details of the brain, which we do in the book Aware, but the bottom line of all that is these practices promote health. That's the 3-pillar practice. Now, what do people who do the wheel, either right away, what they describe is they can go from being very stressed and nervous to feeling a sense of harmony and clarity. They have described in just a 25-minute practice, not when they make it a regular practice, but just that immediate practice for people who've never meditated before. When they turn for example, the spoke around into the hub, people who have never done any meditation before will describe things like profound experience, as one member of a parliament in another country said, incredible experience of love, awareness that we're all interconnected in ways he had never experienced before. Or in Seattle, a Microsoft engineer who had just retired was crying, saying that when he bent the spoke around, he had never had the realization that all of life is part of one interconnected web. And he's crying in front of 500 people, and this is a person who never had done any meditation before, a 25-minute practice. So what people who then practice the wheel over time, not just in one-time practice, but they feel stronger in their bodies, they feel clearer in their minds, they feel a sense of resilience, so that things that before may have really upset them, they feel calm and clear. And now in the time of the COVID pandemic, we're experiencing people in our community who do the wheel and are finding it a deep source of resilience and hope. So it's been fascinating. And when we talk about the mechanisms of awareness itself and of presence, which I do in the book Aware, and which we do in our community, it really helps you see why doing three-pillar practice, or why doing the wheel as an example of three-pillar practice, would give you hope. Why would it give you a feeling of love? Why would it give you a feeling of connection? And there's, I think, a scientific explanation for it that I suggest in the book Aware.
Yeah, which you really described very profoundly in the book. Yes.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
really,
you.
it sounds so amazing and great. And in the book, you take also a big step further. You explore this wheel of awareness, and we don't have the time to discuss all the aspects in the book because it's 400 pages, but there are two aspects I really liked, and this is the plane of possibility and the filter of consciousness. So maybe we have the time to just give a short idea of what it's meant with this. Like the plane of possibility, we already talked about integration, but you say the plane of possibility can be thought as the portal to integration. And living from this plane of possibility, I think it's so promising, as I know from the book. Maybe you can say a little bit about this.
Well, Usha, I think that's so beautiful the way you're describing it. And I deeply appreciate that you can get a sense of the bridge that this framework that is presented in Aware offers to people. So the short way of describing it is when I was receiving all these direct experiences from the first 10,000 people who did the wheel in workshops, and of course my patients and my colleagues who were doing it, and myself, I needed to try as a scientist to find an explanation for why people felt in the hub, for example, timelessness. Why did they feel a shift in their identity from being a separate self to feeling connected to everything? What in the world was going on when people were experiencing love or could feel possibility arise where before they felt stuck and stagnant and hopeless? When they got to that hub of the wheel, just as the metaphor, why were they feeling this sense of joy? And this happened over and over and over again. And it didn't matter whether I did the wheel right away in a workshop or at the end of the day, or whether a person was running a meditation center or had never meditated before in their life, young, old, didn't matter their professional background, their educational background. It just didn't matter. It was absolutely fascinating. So as a scientist, I turned to the brain science first to try to see, was there a view from current brain science that would match with people's first person, direct, subjective experience. And there was not really anything that was that illuminating or that exciting or that much of a match. You know, you could say the brain is integrated when consciousness arises, and that's a leading theory. And I love that. And integration, of course, is what we've been talking about for decades. So that was exciting. But that doesn't say why you feel timelessness or, you know, this sense of interconnection. So I happened to be teaching in Europe at a monastery with 150 physicists. And I was doing the workshops on the wheel and was getting these findings, and I was with these physicists. So I said to them, you know, based on what I had written about, you know, 15 or 20 years earlier, that the mind is emerging from energy flow, and that the study of energy flow in the brain didn't really help us so far as much as it could perhaps in the future. But physicists have been studying energy for a long time. So I would ask them, what's energy? Now, the quantum physicists would say something different than what a classical Newtonian physicist would say, which is energy is the ability to do work, is what we usually hear. But a quantum physicist doesn't say that. She or he says energy is the movement from possibility to actuality. And I remember walking around the monastery, hearing this, and working with some graduate students who were trying to help me translate what was going on with all these physicists. I wrote out this graph where I showed that at the bottom of the graph would be what the quantum physicists were calling the sea of potential, or this quantum vacuum, where it's the formless source of all form. And then arising from that, going through different degrees of probability, all the way up to an absolute certainty as a peak, which you would say, like, if there were 1 million words you and I could share, Usha, then I think of one, you don't know what it is. The bottom would be where all those possibilities are sitting. But once I say ocean, it's 100%. We're now at a peak. But if I'm only thinking about the 5 oceans, it would be at a place of 1 out of 5. But the bottom place would be 1 out of 1 million, the maximal uncertainty. So when you graph this out, which I do step by step by step with my daughter's help in the diagrams in the book, Daniel Siegel, you can see then that there is a match in the quantum physics view of energy as moving to different degrees of probability, and exactly what people describe in the Wheel of Awareness practice. So this, my mind was exploding because I said, oh my gosh, here is a branch of science that is doing its own thing, that has come up with a view of energy. And here is just a direct experiential practice, the Wheel of Awareness, that isn't trying to say anything about energy or physics or anything, but they matched completely. So then it looked like a thought or an emotion or a memory would be a peak of actuality. A mood or state of mind or intention would be what we call a plateau, you know, like those 1 out of 5 things. It's a higher probability. But when you drop all the way down to the sea of potential, which on the diagram looks like a plane, because it's 3-dimensional with time going across on the x-axis, probability up and down on this y-axis, and what's called diversity going in and out of the plane in the z-axis. But anyway, it's a plane. The plane of possibility looks like it correlates with awareness. And then once you see that, everything started making sense. That the reason why awareness, presence, is so important for health is that when you access this sea of potential, instead of being stuck in plateaus of limited possibility or actualities of repeated thoughts that just keep you in prison, when you learn that art and the science of dropping into this plane of possibility, awareness or presence, this open awareness, that's where other options are sitting. And so when you look at the physics of that, at the higher levels, you're probably experiencing what Sir Isaac Newton would say was this Newtonian or classical physics view. Things are like nouns or entities. But when you go down to this quantum level, and we do have these physics as established, we have two realms of one reality. The Newtonian macro state view, where things are like noun-like entities that interact but are fundamentally separate. But in the quantum realm, which has been established, there are no noun-like entities. There are verb-like events that are massively interconnected. And I think the wheel is just one of many ways, but a very direct way. With the metaphor of a hub, you get pure awareness. You drop into that plane of possibility. You experience this sense of interconnection. You experience timelessness, because there is no what's called arrow of time in the quantum realm. There's no directionality of change. So you feel that as timelessness. And then what you do is the feeling of love, I think, is a universal force that comes from this plane of possibility. Love, interconnection, and awareness is what people describe. That tens of thousands of people access this. And when you start doing this in your daily practice, which the book Aware teaches you, people start to live, as you say, from the plane of possibility. You don't have to just live in it. You live from it, so that you can press on the brakes at a traffic light. That's a peak. You want to have those peaks. You want to get ready to drive your car or your bicycle. That's a plateau. Great. But when you bring the plane of possibility with you, pure awareness, presence, life changes. And the research then, and Alyssa Epple and I, with some colleagues, we wrote a whole paper on this view of this 3P diagram explains why presence promotes physiological changes in your body and even creates the integration in your brain. So it's an exciting moment to share that with everyone. And then when people experience both the direct practice, that's the practice of presence, and the science, it's a synergy. It's so exciting because you have the science, the practice, you can practice it every day, and then it expands and expands and expands. And when you share it with other people, it's just beautiful.
Yeah, really, it sounds like this. Yeah, amazing. And it's great how you can explain this just in a few minutes. I mean, you could also, you also wrote the whole book about it, and
yeah,
it was a wonderful explanation. And actually, it was such a beautiful ending. And so maybe to come to a last question, I wanted to ask you about how long should this meditation practice be done, but you already answered this. So maybe then my last question is, is there anything you want to tell your German audience now in these special times of this COVID pandemic? Is there anything, what is important, except I think now I know the answer because it's doing the wheel of awareness practice, I would say.
Yeah.
But maybe you want to say something from your point of view.
Yeah, well, no, it's a great question, Usha. I appreciate that. And this is for everyone on the planet, and not just people in Germany or Europe or wherever, but it's everyone. But you know, having been in Munich teaching the wheel just less than a year ago, when we could meet in person, you know, it was received very well by the German audience. So I can say directly that it worked out well that way. What I would say is this in terms of the pandemic. You know, the disruption in human lives, both loss of lives and loss of livelihoods, especially in the United States that we're experiencing. I think in Germany, you've done a much better job dealing with than the catastrophic failure that the un-United States has experienced with this virus for many, many reasons that we don't need to talk about. But the bottom line is you in Germany have done a much better job, certainly than, actually you can say that pretty much about every country on the planet than the United States. So in general with the pandemic, I think what it's an invitation is to say, instead of just going back to the way things were, with the disruption we've experienced as a human family, the wheel of awareness offers a couple things. Number one, for you as an individual, it offers research-established 3-pillar practices. So the wheel itself hasn't been studied, but the 3 pillars have been studied, and they're all in the wheel. So it offers a research basis for building your own inner resilience, physiological health. So in terms of fighting a virus, if we look at those 5 things I listed, improving immune function, reducing inflammation, reducing the way stress affects you, improving cardiovascular function, and optimizing telomerase levels. If you said there was a pill to help you during the COVID pandemic to stay healthy, those would be the things you would want a pill to give. Well, there is 3-pillar practice. You get them all in the wheel. So that's the first thing. An integrated brain will give you resilience. So in the stresses, the psychological stresses, an integrated brain is what you want to get. 3-pillar practice gives you an integrated brain. And, in the book, as you know, in the Where, I talk about that in depth. So for your personal well-being, this is essential. Second thing, we are more than just personal, we're also relational. So for our connections with other people, even though we're physically distancing, we should not be social distancing. That is, we need to maintain physical distance, not sharing our air and spreading the virus, but we need to maintain social connection because we are relational beings. So especially in countries, this may not be true in Germany, but especially in the United States, where people are so independent, so isolated, and they don't work well together in collaboration, and even putting on a mask is thought of as an attack on American independence. It is the saddest thing to see when science is not honored and medical advice is not honored because people have an idea that wearing a mask means you're giving up your rights. No, what it means is you're protecting other people. So I can say as a person from the United States that it makes no sense to deny science. So what I try to do in Aware is give people the science of relationships even that says, we really are really interconnected with each other. Other people are part of who we are, and the planet, all of nature is a part of who we are. The wheel of awareness in a simple 25-minute practice, and the minimal you should be doing is about 12 minutes a day. You get twice that with the wheel. But there are, if you go to my website, there are even shorter versions. So you can do a faster one if you're on the go, but the issue here is that we need as a human family to expand our sense of who we are. We're not just a me, we're also a we. And the wheel ends with this notion of mui, M-W-E. And some of my German colleagues have come up with, I don't know how you'd say that, Usha, what would be the me plus we, combining it to another word that has both me and we in it. I can't remember what it is in German, but...
in the book we said ich, wir. So we just made one word out of the 2 words.
As the 2, beautiful. And that's what we do with mui, M-W-E, is sort of me and we combined as mui. So what's fun about that as the end of the wheel and also discussions we can have is if we as a human family during this pandemic and then as we go through it, realize our identity is not just a me, but it's also a we, and we don't have to give up either one. We combine them as ich wir.
Ich wir, yeah.
Ich wir, yeah. Then the exciting thing is we can have a reimagined way we as a human family live with each other and live with nature. And that is, I think, where we need to go through this pandemic.
So thank you very much. It's really a beautiful ending and message with hope. And I thank you very much for this and also for our really interesting conversation and again for your time and for your work. Thank you, Dan.
Well, thank you. And thank you for bringing the book Aware to the German-speaking world. And I'm so excited that we could have this conversation. Thank you for the wonderful questions.
Thank you. You're welcome. So take care and have a good day.